Hi, I'm Shick. Welcome to my speed draw. I've never done one of these before, but I've always wanted to do one. The thing that's been stopping me is that I don't like the sound of my own voice, so I'm not going to be doing a lot of editing. So get ready for some pauses and some stuttering and some oh my god. Um, with that out of the way, let's just begin. So I had already started this drawing. I just did the face and the sketch basically. And I just had the hair left to do the line art for. But I decided I wanted to record the rest, so here I am. And I'm using Psy, and I'm using a brush called the Mess Brush, which has a little tapered end and some decently soft edges on it. And I use that for most of the line art in my pieces. It's just really solid. It really helps with those little pointy edges that I use in the hair a lot. It makes the curves look really smooth, and the lines connect very easily, which is a huge benefit for me because I like having all my edges connected, and you'll see why later. So I'm just doing the hair, which is on a different layer than the face right now. That just makes me a little bit less worried about stopping my lines. I can just let them go freely and look a little bit nicer. And then I can just erase them later as I need to, which is what I'm doing now. The character I'm drawing, his name is Frescures. He is just a fun character to draw. At this point, I realized the ear had a lot of tangents in it, so I'm going to move that so that I'm not worried about all these crossing lines, and then I just erase what I don't need because it's behind his hair. So anyway, Frescures, he's a pretty fun character to draw, but he is not very fun to write. He's just he can't stay serious, and every time I try to get him in a normal scene where he's talking about politics or talking about his way of life or whatever, he just starts talking about conspiracies and like the government and stuff. So he's just a little bit frustrating sometimes. He's only really good for comic relief in the end of it, but he does have a very, very tragic story. Um, it's just very played down, I find, and I find like his partner has a little bit more concern about it than he does. So now I am selecting everything outside of what I'm coloring. That is why I like to have my lines connected so that I don't have to worry about selecting things that I don't want and then having to go back and connect all the lines, find out where that little hole is. And I had trouble selecting that little piece by the hair. So then I use the bucket tool and I bucket everything. I inverted the selection and then I put a nice solid skin tone on there, whatever base skin tone I'm using. And I've been told, like, don't use the bucket tool, it's bad, but I find this saves me a lot of time and a lot of coloring, is just to have a base layer that covers everything that you're going to color. The reason this is just so useful for me is because I do a lot of stuff for Redbubble, and I like to have little transparent PNGs and stuff. And if you miss a spot in the middle somewhere, you just have that hole there for life. And then you end up going on Redbubble and like buying a shirt, and then it just has a big black dot in it because you got a black t-shirt with a character on it. So this gives you a really solid base. And then I just plotted in all the the shading, and then I blending it with a water brush, so it's very, very light. It gives you really good gradients, and I am a sucker for gradient. Like, I like when you don't notice that there's different colors at a first glance. My art looks very solid, but if you look closely, there's like a lot of little subtle changes to the color in them, and I really like doing that. So it's a great brush for me to be using. So I'm just blending everything in, making it look really, really smooth. And I'm adding some yellow to his cheeks in replacement for a blush. What I'd normally do, I'd add a pink or a red or a gold if the character has darker skin. Just whatever color would match the skin. And now I'm adding a really nice rim lighting, just to everywhere. The eyelids, the tentacles and stuff. And haven't done the eyelids yet, apparently. Alright, and then I blended the eyelids in, and I was like, I might as well do it all. So I'm blending all the rim lights in. But I didn't realize until after I had done this that I forgot to blend in the rim lights on the neck and the side of the face, or the shoulder. So, I had to go back and do that after I'd merged all the layers. That was a bit of a hassle. So now I'm doing the eyes. This is still on the same layer as everything else, so that makes blending a lot easier and a lot more smooth and seamless. So I just blend in all that white. It just looks a lot nicer than like what I used to do, where it was just solid and you couldn't tell where the eyes began. You could tell where the eyes began and the skin ended. And I'm coloring the eyes. Now this is the one part of it that I really should be doing on a different layer, and I am trying to do that a little bit more often because I keep picking up the white around the edge. So I spend a little bit of time fixing that, but it's a circle, it's not super hard to fix. But blending it all the highlight in. But I don't keep my eyes completely blended in all the time. So they look a little bit brighter when I put some highlights in. And when I put like little details like this in, I like to look at both eyes at once so that they're even and similar. Especially since these eyes are not, if you look at the shape of them, they're not similar at all. But, you know, Proskira is one of those characters you can get away with being wrong, because he's a gremlin. And I'm just coloring the teeth, still on the same layer, the teeth and the tongue. Most artists would put this all on different layers, but I find because a lot of my art was done at a time when I had a computer that was like 6 years old, it was starting to get laggy, it was complete garbage at one point. I could barely do anything on it without a crash. So I ended up developing little techniques in order to color without using a lot of layers. So now I'm using a new layer finally on the hair. And this is where it gets a little complicated. And this is the reason why I use the bucket tool so heavily in the initial stage, because this is in a clipping group. And it only color on what's beneath it. So that saves me a lot of time just picking at the edges of the hair and trying to get that point. I'd still have to worry about around the face and stuff, but it saves me a little bit of time, especially if I'm doing a character with a lot of points in their hair. He's kind of average. I have some with more, some with less. And it just kind of depends on their hairstyle or their hair type. And it just, if I do a character with like longer hair, it's usually not a problem. If they have slicked back hair, I will do that on a different layer and then merge once I'm done coloring it, and then blend the the hairline so that you don't know where it starts and ends. I just like things being really seamless and soft. So I don't really have to worry. But I do find it kind of hilarious that I don't use a lot of layers because I've collabed with artists that have used 100 layers, literally 100 layers, and then did the same thing with 4. So, mind you, they were doing backgrounds and stuff for the piece as well, but I was doing just 2 characters, and I did it all in the same, like, 4 layers. I do a lot of temporary layers too, where I do it and then I merge it, but that would be for like if I'm doing slick back hair or if I'm doing a bracelet or something. And now I'm doing just testing out colors and I'm blocking in shading for the hair. And when I'm using shading, I try to go with a different spot on the color wheel. I never go for the same spot because that just makes everything look flat. So I'm blending it, but I kind of figured it looked a little bit too diluted, so I was blocking in a little bit more, and I realized I liked that more. So I ended up going back and just blotting in whatever color, the shade color, and then I blend it. And that makes it look a little bit less diluted. It doesn't give you as much texture, really, and doesn't make the individual hairs look solid. And I think around this point I realized I'd missed a few spots, so I'm going back and I'm just fixing those little missed spots and little spots where I'd gone over the line. What I have done sometimes is select everything other than the hair and then invert the selection like I do. Now I'm adding some bright green and blending that in as a highlight. But I find sometimes that can get a little bit hard, especially if you have slicked back hair, or you miss one little line, you gotta go back and do the line art for that again, and it's a mess, and this is just, it's not as fun to watch either. So, I just put the hair in like I would normally do. I'm putting some rim lighting on. I realized I hadn't put enough on. I'm using the really bright yellow because I want it to really be exaggerated. And I'm gonna block in that. And blending. Yeah, I really do have a lot of fun drawing him, but, and the other fish people that I have as characters. Now I'm adding a new layer, and I'm realizing the videos was really long at this point. Knowing I was gonna have 2 times speed, I was like, I'm not gonna really make it too long, so I was just gonna blot in kind of what the background was, like a pillow and a bed frame and a wall and a window. But a window and a wall. But I've done this sometimes. It works really well if it's not a detailed background, if it's just a ground and a pathway. It's not a huge deal. But this just was too much detail to really make it look good and make it just enough that you knew something was going on in the background. So that's how you know my art's. I was like getting tired of my art is when I put in a background that's all blended and it's just a blotted in whatever. But then I remembered another piece I did with Frescuras where I had water in the background. So I just decided to recreate that with the water texture and change the color so it's a little nice. And then I'm putting in some beams of light because the whole point of this piece was that the light source was very strong, so I decided to make it strong all throughout. So I am just putting in light beams and I'm blending, but it's becoming too yellow. So I'm just finishing up the blending and I'm adding some blue, but you know, it's still catching in there, so I just end up adding a solid blue in there and blending that. And it just looks very, very soft and oceany. And he is a sea creature, so it fit. It looked good. It's a nice color for him. Now I'm merging all my layers for Frescurize, and then I copy it. Then I use the bucket tool to turn that bottom layer solid. And I just scoot it a little bit to the side, and then I'm changing the colors a little bit. And over here, you can't see the menu, but I'm turning it to a shade mode. And just kind of moving it around and fixing it. So that's pretty much all I was doing, and I do this with a lot of my pieces. It really separates it from the background, and it makes it just really cool. So anyway, that's the drawing. Really thank you for finishing it and getting all the way through it. Thank you.